All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Life Less Perfect podcast. I'm your host, Shauna G. And once again, I'm super excited to introduce my guest this week. Her name is Madhavi Parikh. Madhavi is a PA, physician associate, who has combined her love of medicine and meditation, along with her own journey to heal from life's experiences, to now offer clinical coaching to individuals on the cancer journey. Her approach to care integrates conventional medicine with complementary and alternative modalities, as well as the 4 quadrants of the body: spiritual, physical, intellectual, and emotional, to meet patients and caregivers where they are on their journey. Through her unique I-SPIE Health model, and with kind attention and gentle curiosity, Madhavi empowers individuals to regain control of their health by providing education, encouragement, and support in a way that is both comprehensive and easy to understand, enabling them to become active participants and make informed decisions about their care. Madhavi Parikh, welcome to the Life Less Perfect podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's my distinct pleasure. So, as you may or may not know, on the podcast, we like to talk about when life is less perfect, and how those times in our lives can possibly help shape us and move us to maybe the place where we are now. As the saying goes, all roads lead to here. So, Madhavi, maybe you can share a little bit of your history and sort of what got you to this place, helping cancer patients understand their diagnosis a little better and help them move through the process with a little more clarity and a little less fear.
Yeah, that's a big topic. But first of all, just wanted to say thank you for having me on, and love your description of life is less perfect, because that is what leads us to here. And growing from that has been my journey as well. So I grew up in India. I lived there until I was 23. And my life was not the easiest. My parents, I would say, are more narcissistic, dominating kind of people who very early on ingrained in me that you have to be perfect, but also know that you will never, ever be perfect enough. So the whole thing was that you have to be seen and make sure that you do great big things, but never be heard. That was kind of taken to the next step by sending us to a boarding school in India. And that boarding school is where we were taught to learn, eat, speak, think everything in English, even though that was not our native language. And it was also to groom us in a certain way so that you got out into the world and accomplished great things. And I also grew up in a Jain family, which is where the emphasis is on nonviolence. And that emphasis is in religion, it is expressed through penance of different kinds. So it's a life of, the more austere the life you live, the better it is. So you are always repenting for things. So guilt became a part of me, partly because I was a very sensitive person, and also because I noticed as a very young child the expectation of perfection. So I kind of molded into that versus my sister, who's a year and a half younger than me, had severe ADHD, which wasn't diagnosed, which wasn't a thing back then. At least we didn't know about it. And she was always getting into trouble. So I was comparing myself to that and making sure I never got into trouble. Another part that shaped my life was quite a few deaths from the beginning. I was very young when I lost my 2-month-old sister to metabolic disease, is what I think it was at that point. My mother carried her through pregnancy, through to term, with Graves' disease, even though she was told that she would never carry the baby to term. But the child did come to term, but then didn't survive. The big influence was my nanny, who I observed suffocating to death from an asthma attack, and we didn't have a way to get her the treatments and enough medical care in time. But another one that stands in memory was my great grandfather. He was 103, I think, when he decided he had had enough of life and decided that he was going to move on, pass on. So, in 3 days, on the first day, he stopped taking his medicines. The next day, he stopped taking his food. The third day, he stopped drinking. And by day four, he was no more. And I thought that was so beautiful. And
Beautiful.
what I remember out of that was the community coming together. So in Hinduism or any versions of Hinduism, including Jainism, death is kind of mourned and then celebrated over at least a period of 13 days or so that I know of. So in the first few days, it is more about mourning and making sure that you work through the grief. And it's especially powerful for like when and then my dad passed away, and I'll come to that, but when my dad passed away, it was more towards the spouse and the children being left behind, versus if someone is much older, then you celebrate their life, versus somebody much younger, then you kind of mourn their loss. But the first few days are towards mourning the grief and getting into that grief state so that it all comes up. And then on the 13th day, you celebrate with a community dinner where life comes to full circle because it's everyone. The kids are moving around. There are old people, there are young people. You feed people from the community. So that was like really beautiful for me to watch. And I was a teenager. Until then, I didn't really understand what death was.
I'm sorry, Madhavi, because I'm curious to know your experience, how that differed when you were younger and you lost your young baby sister. I'm so sorry. That must have been so difficult. And then watching your nanny. How was that addressed, as a child? How were you supported in your grief or your fear, as it might have been?
So in India, it's like death is a part of life.
Mhm.
So it's not like something that we dread or we are sad about. We are sad in losing the person, but at the same time, it's not something that we avoid or we get traumatized by because it's just a part of life. And people move on. And it's also because in India there are so many people, it's like that just happens.
Yeah, of
So
course.
you move on. So the way I saw it, and for me, all these observations are more in retrospect versus what was happening at that time. With my sister, it was just something, yeah, she passed away. We have the rituals and you move on. With my nanny, it was something that left a lasting impression, which I didn't know I was carrying until much later when I got into the field of death and dying through cancer. But I now remember that we had gone to, with my mother, she and I had gone to her village, to her family to turn in her possessions. And I vaguely remember that that was quite a sad experience for me. But otherwise, you just take it in stride and you move on.
Yeah, and I think I want to point out how interesting that is, as someone who's grown up in North America and in sort of traditional Christianity. I mean, my mother wasn't deeply religious. We were sort of, I think they call it ABC Christians. We went to church on holidays and things like that.
Right.
My mom really was quite open-minded and left my spirituality to explore for myself as an adult, which gave me a lot of
Awesome.
freedom. But again, death and dying wasn't something that we talked about or that I understood. I think I told you, like, I had this sort of sense as a young child about possibly, reincarnation and things like that. But that's not something we're taught as Christians,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I actually lost my father when I was 10 years old, and it had a profound effect on me. It actually terrified me and made me very afraid of death and of losing everyone around me, and he was only 33 years old, so he was quite young. So it had quite a profound impact on me. So I think it's really interesting, just the cultural perspective of death and dying. That's again part of one of the reasons I want this podcast to be a safe place for us to talk about these things, because it should really be an everyday part of
Correct.
life. I mean,
Right.
the Buddhists, I think, believe it the same way, that, today is a good day to die.
Right, right. And
And
metaphorically, also, you can take death as like in Buddhism too. It's like this moment is different, completely different from the previous moment and will not be the same as the next moment. So that is death as well.
Yes.
Everything, it's impermanent, it's new, it's ever changing,
Mhm.
it's never the same. So that is what kind of helped me further down the road when I started meditating, practicing insight meditation. And one of the things in Hinduism during the death rituals is that the belongings of the person who passed away are donated. You don't hold on to anything. And the ashes are, because there's cremation, the ashes are then spread or sent into flowing water so that again it's moving on
Mhm.
symbolically.
Beautiful. I love.
So then, when I was about 18, my dad had a stroke that paralyzed him from the neck down. But he was brought home, and with a combination of and traditional Ayurvedic, integrative, holistic measures that we knew of in India, my mom took like complete care of him for the next 2 years and at home, and he never had a bed sore, is what I remember. Now, those times were very, very difficult for me, but I was also fortunate to see the complete devotion that a sick person can get and how much of a difference that can make in a person's care.
Yeah.
And like you, I was young. I wasn't as young as you, but my sister was 10 years old. My youngest sister was 10 years old when our dad got sick, and then he passed away 2 years later. But that was also very profound. And then it was his last ceremonies where my mom had to give up her, things that symbolized marriage, that symbolized their union, which are like bangles and things like that, those kind of things. And all his clothes were given away. So we don't have anything at home of his, or at least at that time didn't, that I remember. So those were the influences that I had. And then I came to America and became a physician assistant, started practicing medicine. And for some reason or another, cancer medicine is where I got my first job, but it was also something I got attracted to. And one of the big reasons for that attraction now in retrospect was that they had a lot to teach me. I had a lot of trauma growing up, having been separated from my parents and going to a boarding school, growing up with the nuns, almost trying to be converted into Catholicism, growing up as a Jain at home, being pulled away from the fabric of life because we were 9 months in a boarding school. I was bullied as a child just because I wasn't confident, and yet I was trying to be perfect at the same time, I think. All of and narcissistic parents, where I was always reconciling the fights between my parents as the eldest. All of those kind of things took its toll eventually. So when I started working with my cancer patients and seeing like what is it that makes some of them do well through treatment, and why is it some of them don't do well? I was also noticing the difference between different communities, white, isolated, nuclear families versus the African American community where it's like the whole family comes in, or the Indian community where like 10 people are in the room trying to find out what can they do to get a cure for the person who's affected. Just so those kind of different things I was observing and trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, I found the practice of Vipassana meditation, insight meditation. And that was a life-changing thing for me because as a scientist, you believe in cause and effect. And Buddhism is all about cause and effect, action and reaction. And it just made me go inward to understand all of that from the perspective of my experiences.
Mm.
And that is how I came about into this field where I am right now.
What an incredible journey. And I love that it's given you such a breadth of experience and perspective, because I think that's so important. And often I think that's what leads us into being these sort of more diversified practitioners, shall we say. So tell me, what sort of was the catalyst that got you into the Vipassana meditation? I'm curious.
Just my own suffering. And I was seeing, I had had children already, and I was seeing that I was turning into my own parents for my children. And my catalyst, and it remains to this day, that I did not want to be lost to my children the way I was lost to my parents. So my mother still lives with us, with my husband and I. It's just cultural, and it's a duty that I have chosen to fulfill versus divorcing my family or people I don't like. It's like, because I believe in reincarnation, I wanted to finish all my duties and responsibilities as much as I could in this life so that I didn't have to carry it into the next. That's
Love-
my only impetus to
Yeah.
work with my mother. So
Yeah.
even though I haven't, it's hard for me to forget, like the triggers come up every now and then, but I have tried to do my best to forgive or move on, or at least find some level of kindness in our relationship, that I can not be so harsh towards myself or towards her.
Yeah.
Not that I'm perfect by any means, but at the same time, I needed to let go of that anger that I was carrying. But the main impetus was that I did not want to lose my children, lose myself to my children the way I was lost. And
Beautiful.
then I realized that I needed to become a better person for me to become a better parent, and on and on and on,
Mm.
and not be bullied for the rest of my life by anyone.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And it really is a full circle experience when we can come to understanding sort of the role these people play in the
Correct.
theater of our lives. And really, how she's come to shape you. And like you say, play out maybe some soul agreement together, some karma, and which ultimately leads you into your dharma, if I understand that correctly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so beautiful, full circle. And there's a saying that I've heard. I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Edward Grant. He's an interesting man. He's a polymath. He's really bridging the gap between science and spirituality. I think you would find
Correct.
him interesting.
Okay.
But he likes to say, we will continue to attract everything we judge until we no longer judge everything we attract, which
Correct.
is quite a profound statement,
It
really.
is very much.
And it
Yes.
and it really has helped me come to have compassion for the people and experiences in my life. It doesn't mean we condone the behavior,
Correct.
um, but we come to see how these things happen for us, and that's really the whole premise of this
Right.
podcast. So thank you
Right. Yeah.
for sharing that perspective. It's really lovely. So tell me then, now, were you working in traditional oncology, chemotherapy and radiation and all of that kind of thing? And what was your experience with that?
So one of the things that I now know about myself is that I always knew that I would be where I needed to be, and I would actually do this from the very beginning. I just had to wait my time. And everything that came along in my journey was for me to step into myself eventually. And I don't know if it completely happens, but I feel now that I am finally comfortable in my own skin. But all those experiences, even growing up, where I saw the abuse towards my sister, for example, if I may say that, all the injustices that were being done to myself, my family, it didn't matter to whoever, that I needed to be there. I needed to go through them, sort of. I needed to observe them. I needed to witness them. And that would kind of lead me. So I've had this inbuilt patience to accept what comes my way. So going through conventional medicine, practicing in the conventional space, I was bullied a lot by the higher ups, the totem pole of the hierarchy of corporations that exist. But I also knew that until I faced my own fear and I could stop the bullying without malice towards the other person, like you said, like without judging the other person, that's when life would begin for me. And there was an incident that happened at work, and I was, I don't know, 53, 55, maybe in my early 50s at that point, where it did happen. I had to step into it, I had to take ownership. So until then, I was doing the work that I needed to do. So I was using my meditation to help me cope with all of that. But I was also surrounded by people who were teaching me many things. So people teach you things in two ways, what to do and what not to do. And keeping my eyes and mind open to both of them was the journey that I was making myself go through. But I was also using my patients and their interactions, like learning about the behavior of cancer. What is it that cancer is trying to teach us? And to that person who has been affected by it and their family, what is the cancer trying to teach them? And who is learning from it and who is not learning from it?
What an incredibly beautiful observation. Um,
So that kind of helped me to learn what I needed to learn to grow.
Beautiful. And can you help us understand then what, and you don't have to use specific patients or name any names, obviously, but like, can you give us sort of a general example of what you've seen cancer trying to teach your patients and or you?
Oh my God, so many things. One is letting go.
Mhm.
That is the big thing, right? Like letting go in so many ways, the grudges, the anger, the negativity, the fears, all of that. And what is worth holding on to? And ultimately, it's nothing, right? At the very core, it's basically nothing. But what is worth holding on to? And how petty can we be in this process, or how generous can we be?
Mhm.
How do the generous of heart or spirit go through this journey versus the very small narrow-minded people who go through this journey? Well, what is the relationship with the family like? Are the partners, are the spouses holding on to them so much that they're not letting go? There were the younger people versus the older people who got cancer. How did they go through that journey? And the fear of death was a big thing. And why is that fear there? But it comes down to letting go.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like all of these experiences. My marriage in its early days was also difficult. Being a parent, sort of, I'm very fortunate to have my children, but at the same time, I wasn't prepared to be a parent. So holding on to all of those life's injustices, why me, the victim mind of me holding on to all of those things, it made me question that.
Mhm.
So some of the things cancer teaches.
Gosh, there's so much gold to mine there. I'm not sure where to begin. So, if you were to take all of the things, like you say, whether it's the letting go, whether it's the holding on to resentments, whether it's the fear of death and dying, which one would you say would be the most common in terms of North Americans anyway?
Letting go and lack of trust, right? We don't let go because we don't trust, and we are taught not to let go. I mean, we're taught not to trust in so many different ways. And that is part of that independence as well, that I want to be independent. But if we take the literal meaning of it, it's we are holding on to things. I'm going to do it all by myself. And I can't receive care because I don't know how to receive care. And why don't you know how to receive care? It's because I don't know how to trust. I can't let go. And it all came to that.
That's so interesting that you said that because I have come to understand that is a bit of a trauma response, right?
Correct.
I
Yeah.
something my own self have experienced, and to this
Right.
day, I'm working through being able to receive. I'm very good at, I'm a health coach myself. I'm very good at giving to others and taking care of
Right.
others and all of that. But to receive care and attention and support is difficult for me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is
Mm-hmm.
because I think, not unlike you, I had a lot of childhood trauma and it taught me that no one was going to take care of me but me. And so that's what we do. We create these walls and these things that we think that we're doing the right things, but ultimately we really have to release that and surrender into allowing, others to help us. So I love that you brought that up. It's very relevant for me.
But it makes us it's like I have to be open to being vulnerable, to
Yes.
sharing myself. And one of the things that I noticed was that this was more common in the Caucasian community
Yeah.
where we are being independent, but then the way the African American community, with their life's experiences throughout generations, they relied on their community to hold them, to uplift them, right? So they shared themselves. They're very open and generous of spirit. Like and that's partly in India too. The less I have, the more we rely on each other to support ourselves. In scarcity, there is abundance,
Yeah.
versus when we have too much, we are always feeling I don't have enough.
And more isolated. And I think too, it's true here in Canada where I am, and the Indigenous communities are as well. Uh,
Right.
I would love to see us move towards a much more supportive model
And
in
an abundance mindset. And that was also something that I had to understand, that I don't live in scarcity. I am safe. I I am going to live, or nothing is going to happen to me. And whatever happens, it's okay because I'm still safe.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So the letting go was the most common denominator. And and curious now, so how do you work with your patients and clients now in this integrative model? Maybe you could lead us through that a little bit.
So death and dying always held a special place for me, and metaphoric death is what I was more interested in, because ultimately we're going to die. But if we can start understanding death as a metaphoric thing, which is where again we are safe, and it doesn't mean that everything comes to a standstill, and being a new person, being a different person, being a changed person is not a bad thing. And it is inevitable as well, because, like you said, this moment is different than the next moment is, and will never be the same ever again, no matter how much I try to recreate it. So that is what meditation helped me understand, that, they keep saying it's very hard to understand live in the now. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Mm,
It's such an abstract thing for someone who doesn't understand that from a more metaphorical level. But for me, it was that it's okay to be a different person, and it's okay to be a flawed person, because ultimately, in God's eyes, we are perfect, whoever that God may be. It's only in my own eyes that I'm not perfect. So who am I to decide for myself that I'm not perfect?
mm,
If I believe in a higher being, whoever that being is. And my journey will always be to go into my higher self. And the sky's the limit there. So I will never, ever be perfect enough.
mm,
So I'm perfect the way I am. So all of that came through meditation, and then through my observation of understanding. And then there were two fellowships that I did. One was in integrative oncology, but the other one that was more profound was in contemplative medicine through a Zen Buddhist center, where they wanted to teach providers that there is a different way of practicing medicine, where you share yourself, where you express your vulnerabilities, and you share in the suffering of the other person. You don't have to create a wall around you to protect yourself. So that allowed me to step out with a little bit more confidence, that I then built on. So, because Vipassana meditation is all about me. And after that fellowship is when I truly understood where what being an island means, where you are independent, where you can carry your own self, but you are also an ecosystem. An island doesn't exist by itself. An island also has its own ecosystem, and that ecosystem sustains the ecosystem of the ocean, and the ocean sustains the island, but they both stand independently of each other. So I am not separate from the outside, but at the same time, I am myself. So that all those understandings is what I started to take in. But two big things happened for me is I understood fear, and I understood loving kindness after 15 years of practice. And that loving kindness, where with the quote of Edward Robert Grant, correct me if I'm wrong, about we
yeah, Robert.
yeah, that part of it was when we stop judging is when acceptance happens, is what started happening to me. So then I was able to freely speak with my patients as well, without holding back, saying, look, you are an expert on you. But at the same time, the medical expertise is not yours as well. So you have to take ownership for your health.
Yes.
I can tell you everything to do, but if you don't do it, nothing is going to happen. So that exchange where I've learned to listen and observe what they're trying to tell us and make it a mutual relationship where then I can tell them that, look, you have to take ownership for your health is kind of the model that I came about with. And then I heard a lecture by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross of the 5 stages of grief fame, where she talked about how illnesses happen when there is a deficiency in one of the four quadrants or more, one or more of the four quadrants of our body.
Mm.
And she made these quadrants of the spiritual, physical, intellectual, and emotional, and which, when in synchrony with each other, we are at our best. And it doesn't matter then whatever we have, whether I have arthritis or whether I have mental illness or whether I have this or whether I have that. If I am grounded in myself, if I know who I am, then I can go through whatever life's challenges happen. And why am I so special that I deserve no challenges is also another thing that helped me get rid of the victim mindset,
Yeah.
right? All of us are not going to come into a happy childhood.
Yeah.
So we have to accept that, we have to take ownership of it, step into it, and then go outside of it.
I love that.
So that is what one of my physicians also taught me is like know your data, but think outside the box.
Mm. Brilliant.
So know your medicine, like in science. So then you start looking at the person, like what is it that they could bring to the table, and then look at why they have those side effects, for example. Like everyone will have fatigue from treatment for the most part,
Mhm.
but that fatigue reasons can be different for different people. One, it could be truly that they have the side effect to the medicine, but another one may not be hydrating properly. Another one may be how many ever years old, for example. All those different reasons for fatigue need to be taken into account, and then you apply it to the person you're working with.
Mm. Mm.
So putting it all together is how I started practicing in the conventional space first.
Mhm.
And then I found a job in integrative oncology in the conventional space with a hospital system that allowed me to kind of deepen it more.
We're so in alignment. It's so interesting as I'm hearing you talk because, I created my own website just even a few years ago. I wanted to upgrade it because I wanted it to be more authentic about who I was as a practitioner. And I have on my very front page a medicine wheel with four quadrants where I have
Right.
exactly those things. For me too, just to step outside of really being, like I said, more authentic as to who I was as a practitioner. And that's also what this podcast is about, to
Right.
that, I do care and I'm not a perfect person. And I'm not sure if I would want to be coached by someone who hasn't had some adversity in their life,
Correct. Right.
because I think, like you said, and I love that you were taught to share your own experiences and how you're human and how we've fallen down and what we've learned, because that's really the medicine, is it not?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So,
One of the exercises we did in that contemplative medicine fellowship was we are usually just taught to brag about ourselves and we hide our shames, right?
yeah.
So, how do we stop doing that? How do we accept our shames just as openly as we accept our achievements? So, we wrote our story about where one of our incidences where we were very shameful about, and then put that in the hat. And then we each picked up one and read that story. So we don't know whose story it was that we read, but that was such a profound thing to see amongst so many physicians, especially. I had done the work, so it wasn't like it was just very cool for me to observe it. I had no problem sharing that I'm faulty to no end.
Flawed
Uh,
human being.
I, I will make mistakes and I will continue to make mistakes for the rest of my life. And before thinking of it as sticking my foot in my mouth, I'm like, now I will make a mistake so I can learn from it and say sorry and move on. But it was so cool to see how it had opened up the people that I was with.
Yeah.
And they are some of the loveliest providers that I know now.
Gosh, I can only imagine. I wish all our physicians could take this training.
Correct.
It's
Oh,
amazing.
absolutely.
The mainstream medical model, while there are so many wonderful therapies and brilliant discoveries, I feel like it's just set up in such a hierarchical fashion. It really takes away the power of the individual. And
Right.
again, we bring it back full circle to your Vipassana meditation, where, it's when we really take responsibility for our healing, I think
Hmm.
that empowers us. But when we give it away to the medical community, we really can become a victim of the system. Do you
Right.
see that at all?
Oh, yeah. I was very much a victim of the system. So I did have that job in integrative medicine, and I thought that was the perfect job because we are always like the common mindset is that it's a job, it's stability, you keep that forever. So when I got that job, I was very excited. But in 4 years, I was let go as part of the reduction program. And when you look into it, there are so many underlying undertones for why you were let go. And I had to accept that.
So we had a few technical difficulties there, but this is what happens when in the Life Less Perfect podcast, and we roll with it. So we were discussing the medical model and how we can sometimes give away our power to the system, shall we call it. And when we sort of learn to take personal responsibility for our own health, this is where I think the magic can happen. And this is what you're helping your patients do now. Is that correct?
Correct. So by combining my experience in medicine along with my experiences in other fields, including training in other complementary and alternative modalities, kind of learning how to weave in and integrate it by meeting the person where they are, because everyone's needs are different, but the common denominator is that they have cancer. And understanding the behavior of cancer helps to not make it so terrifying, and that it can be more of a wake up call instead of the death sentence that cancer makes us believe that it can be. So instead of feeding into that fear of cancer, if we use it more as an empowering agent to listen to the message that it's trying to give us by taking stock of our lives, by seeing what is it that brought us here, to see where we can change to move forward, I think can be quite powerful. And sometimes people just need permission that whatever it is that they're doing is okay, or kind of being told that maybe this is not what serves you well. Let's try and change it in a way that works for you. Putting that on the table makes a whole lot of difference.
Yeah.
And when they feel that they are being heard without being judged, again, that they are being accepted for wherever they come from, and then we make changes to incorporate who they are, I think can help go through journey in a better way.
Beautiful. So would you say obviously you're working holistically through those four quadrants? So are you using diet and lifestyle and all of the things then?
Yes, but what I usually do is when I meet with someone for the first time, I very briefly introduce myself, but then I hand it over to them to tell me their story. So they are telling me their cancer journey, their diagnosis, but I'm also asking about vitamins and supplements they take, their diet and nutrition, what is their activity level, exercise level like, what is their sleep pattern like, what is their social circle, or how do they interact with people? Are they isolated? Are they working on deplete? Because sometimes we just give, give, give. We are more outward than we are inward. What is their faith like? What is their spirituality like? How is it that they're looking at life? What profession are they in? What is their relationship with themselves and their loved ones? So, getting to know all of that, what are their thoughts on conventional medicine versus how cynical or distrusting are they of anything? Or, are they very loving, giving, too trusting of a person? So, looking at all of that to kind of see where they are coming from and where we can go with that is how I try to work with them.
Amazing. And isn't it so important to take each person, in their individuality and
Correct.
their stressors and their life circumstances and their beliefs and all of that,
Right.
because each person's medicine is going to, what's the old saying? One man's poison is another man's medicine.
Right.
Right? So,
Right.
and it's so important, I think, too, to honestly believe in whatever medicine you choose. Would you agree?
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. As you said, one man's poison is another man's nectar,
Yeah.
and too much of a good thing can be bad.
Mhm.
Right. And people say, I'm going to look at it positively. But then I remind them, you can look always be a glass half full person, but what's in the glass? If it's poison, if it's half full with poison, it's still poison. So that's where the work comes in and being able to have that conversation. And not everybody has the same resources to go into this journey.
Mhm.
Some of us have a lot more money, so we can use a lot more tools, but some of us don't have as much money. And the simple thing, maybe let's just eat at home one day a week versus eating organic all the time. Like trying to help people understand that whatever you're doing is going to be enough. It's just a matter of getting started. And from there, the road opens up. Giving them that assurance, I think, is what's needed a lot in
Yeah,
our
I
current state
really
of medicine.
I agree with you there 100%. I've worked with a few clients, just supporting them on their journey as well. And I think just first to like move them out of that place of fear is huge,
Correct.
and
Right.
just say giving them permission to take the time and maybe have another opinion and maybe do their own research a little bit. I think it's just so important. Uh,
Right.
what are your thoughts? I'm curious because I've done some training with, it's called Compassionate Inquiry, with Dr. Gabor Mate. Are you familiar with his work?
Uh-huh. Absolutely. He's amazing.
Isn't he amazing? I love that man. And I've also done some training to work with psychedelic medicines because I'm such a firm believer in going into the deep corners and recesses and sweeping out those cobwebs and
Right.
really trying to understand, what parts of ourselves are we not valuing and loving? Because I think that's what we learn through our sort of more difficult childhoods, right? That's what they're there to teach
Absolutely.
us. I think as it said, we learn through opposites, right? So if we're here to learn unconditional love, then we will learn through conditioned love, right?
Correct. Right.
So what are your thoughts around that sort of Jungian shadow work and things like that as contributing factors and things people can do, maybe even as a preventative measure is sort of where more I work in, but also it can be very helpful, with diagnoses as well, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
So with the diagnosis, I'm all for it, provided it's done in a guided fashion.
Yeah.
So doing psychedelic treatment just for the fun of it, it's a bottomless pit, and then you don't know what to do if all this comes up.
Exactly.
So guided, I'm all for it. And, there is no medicine that is um, useless. There is a role for each medicine. It has to be the right person to use it in, right? So psychedelic treatment is not for everyone, but at the same time, if it helps get rid of all the baggage that we are holding on to help us take the first step forward, who am I to say that that's not the right thing to do?
Yeah. And I've seen it helped people in hospice where it's just
Correct.
helped them
Oh,
let
yeah.
go of the fear of death. It's shown them,
Yes.
that there's nothing to fear.
Yeah, just let go.
It's
Just
like,
let go. If it assists in that, then I'm all for it.
yeah,
Individuals doing it for entertainment purposes, you doing it after all the inner work that you have done, you know how to manage whatever comes up. That's the difference. Sorry?
I have the tools to unpack it.
Correct. Versus meditation, where you cannot go beyond your limits. So
Exactly.
you can only take it so far until you are ready for it. Meditation is not going to allow you to get into that space. Versus psychedelics can just open up the bottom for you and you go into an abyss and you don't know what to do. So I'm all for those tools provided they're used very, very properly,
I would agree.
because otherwise we end up doing more harm than good. Like it's too much of a good thing being bad, right?
Yeah. So couldn't agree more. And I did my own work, like you
Right.
said. And I think psychedelic medicines, they really meet you where you are, as you said.
Right.
So because I was a student of meditation and had been doing my own work for a number of years before I went and had an experience with ayahuasca, you know, I had a profound experience and it was so beautiful and amazing, but there was also a scary aspect to it as well.
Right, right.
Could have been very discombobulating had I not had
Okay.
those tools. And throughout my own journey, I see people out there exploring with psychedelics, and I would wholeheartedly agree with you. You need proper preparation, you need proper guidance in the medicine and proper integration after. And without those things,
Right.
very dangerous, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it led you there, right? It hasn't led me there. So I haven't experimented with
Yeah.
it.
I was completely called to this experience, and
Right,
it was
right.
obviously, even was shown that I was meant to work with these medicines. So yeah, I have people come to me and they want the psychedelic experience. And after we have a conversation, they realize actually what they need is functional medicine. They need
Correct.
to get
Yeah,
the
yeah,
basics dialed in.
right.
And
They
when
need to stop having hot flashes before they go into
hot flashes, they need to stop eating garbage,
process.
basically, getting to bed, and like you said, getting to sleep and eating some good
Right.
food and moving the body a little bit. Like
Correct.
they just kind of come all in wanting to go for this big experience when they're not doing the basics. And I'm a very much a stickler. If you're not doing the basics to take care of yourself and love
Right.
yourself, then this experience is just not going to serve you.
Correct.
So
It will not solve any of your problems that you're
no,
coming in.
no, and quite the opposite. It might make them bigger, as you mentioned. And like you said, meditation can also get us there to the degree where we're ready to explore that
Right.
realm, right? And breath work is
Breath
a
work.
beautiful experience.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing thing. James Nestor's book on breath is something I recommend all the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
So in my practice as well, if the patient is willing to do, I lead them into just a 3-minute practice of breath awareness. There are so many people who don't know what abdominal breathing is. Put your hand on your belly and push your belly out when you breathe in is something that they don't know how to do. And when it's just guided for those 3 minutes, they forget they have pain. They forget everything else. So
The
breath
breath,
work in any which way is amazing work.
the breath is the present moment,
Oh, it
right?
is. It is. When you're one with your breath, there's no room for thoughts. And when through that breath awareness practice, when people experience it, you have to experience breath. You can talk about breath to no end, and no one will get what you're talking about. But the moment you start experiencing that breath, and they realize that there were no thoughts at that time, truly, there were no thoughts at that time, it just blows their mind. And
Mm,
it's such a simple thing.
I love it. I love it. And for me too, I feel it's such because I love prayer too, and I think prayer is powerful. There's a saying that says, when we pray, we speak to God. When we meditate, we listen to
All
God.
right. I love that. Casey
Yeah.
went by that a lot.
Yeah. And that's been
Yeah.
my own experience that when
Yes.
you just connect with the breath and you have some quiet, boom, the things that drop in can be so amazing and
Correct.
profound.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Oh, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Lovely.
Love it.
Well,
Yes.
I think we could just probably talk forever. We're such in agreement on so many things, but I want to talk about your practice a little more and where people can find you. And, maybe you can mention your socials or if you have any programs that you're currently offering or want to speak about.
So I don't have any programs. Everyone is the same, but I don't also turn down anyone. Um, I keep it as simple and I'll meet you where you are because I think even one session can be very impactful for the person going on the cancer journey. I prefer to be contacted by email. I do have social media handles, but I prefer to be contacted by email. That way I can work with them directly. And my email is ispiehealth.com. So the SPIE is the acronym for the spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and I is the integrative. So ISPIE at ispiehealth.com is my email. My website is the same www.ispiehealth.com. And I'm on Facebook with that same name. And I'm also on LinkedIn with that same iSpy Health handle.
What a great name. I
You
love it.
can Yeah, so it was a play on words, but you spy health and you're in good shape. And for North America, I do have a work number, 980-224-0094. And you can text me if you're interested, and I'll get back to you with my information.
Well,
So those are the different ways I can be contacted.
Thank you, Madhava, for sharing all of that information, your email and your personal work number. I really, really respect you so much in the work that you're doing. And thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and talk
Bye.
about your beautiful medicine that you're sharing in the world. I think it's so, so important.
Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the work you are doing in your own practice and in helping people like me spread the word that there are beautiful and kind things that are happening in this world.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Shauna, so much.
Yeah, it's been my absolute pleasure.